I'd like to re-adjourn the public hearing for S15-463 78 Cranberry Road, Special Properties 2 LLC, construction of a 15-unit conservation development in and adjacent to wetlands and water courses. It is Tuesday, July 14, 2015 at 7:20. Can I have the roll call, please?
Karen DeStefanis.
Here.
Bill Nightingale.
Here.
Matthew Caputo.
Here.
Ed Howlinka.
Here.
Okay, at the last meeting, we had finished with the public comment, and now we are moving on to the applicant's rebuttal. So I will turn it over to the applicant.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission. For the record, my name is Liz Succi. I'm an attorney with law firm of, Carmody, Torrance, Sandak, and Hennessy, located at 707 Summer Street in Stamford, and we represent the applicant Special Properties 2 LLC. First, I'd like to identify the individuals from whom you will hear responses to your questions and public comment. That is Holt McCord, our civil engineering of McCord Engineering. First row to his right is Kate Throckmorton of Environmental Land Solutions. Behind Kate is her partner, Matt Popp, also of Environmental Land Solutions. And you may hear from Keith Russo of Special Properties, who's our project manager. First, I'd like to thank the staff and the Commission for the time that you spent in reviewing the application, visiting the site, patiently listening to our presentation and the public commentary on June 23rd, and evaluating our client's request and supporting documents. I'd also like to thank the public for its attendance at the hearing, to listen to our presentation, for its offering of comments, suggestions, and expressing their opinions. I think the public hearing, unlike others before other agencies and perhaps in other towns, was certainly conducted with passion on the side of both the applicant and the public, yet a great degree of civility was just demonstrated by everyone, and that was certainly in the best interest of this commission, the application, and this public forum. I had thought that when we were before you, we had clarified certain misconceptions that appeared in newspaper articles and also were presented in documents by some of the opponents and their experts and during testimony, but it appears that some of those misconceptions continue to exist. So once again, I would like to remind you of the facts of this proposal in the hope of correcting the false information that seems to, for whatever reason, continue to exist and persist in connection with this application. I promise we'll be brief, so I know you have other things to attend to this evening. Further experts who testified on July 23rd will address the various issues and questions raised by the public and by you, and as well as the opponent's consultants. We plan to respond to them directly to you, and our consultants will have written information to provide to you, so you don't have to simply rely on what you may have heard, but their testimony will be based on the documents that they provide to you, all in response to comments raised and questions. To summarize again, the property, as you know, is 15.4 acres. There is approximately 4.97 acres of wetlands and watercourses. The so-called White Barn Preserve is located at the southern end of the property. And once again, hopefully this is the last time I have to say this, it will remain in its present state. We have made no application, no presentation, no suggestion to alter its configuration, or to change the language or obviate the language that exists in the conservation easement that is recorded on the City of Norwalk land records. The land was encumbered by the easement affecting 5.1 acres. Our client agreed to it, our client supports it, and our client is fully willing to abide by the terms and conditions of that easement. Just for your reference, since it was brought up in the presentation on the 23rd, and it's been referenced by us, the proponents, and by the opponents, I have copies of that easement for your edification. It's a document that's recorded on the land records if you'd like it. I provide it to you right now.
Sorry, you're talking about easement A.
Easement A, that is correct. Easement A is the 5.1. Exactly, that's correct, Commissioner. If my memory serves, I believe I handed you a map about 11 by 17 at the hearing on the 23rd that identified easement A and also identified easement B in color. The easement, if you get the opportunity to read it, prohibits certain activities and structures on the property. That language is clear. It is, however, silent as to inclusion of this land for density calculations. The easement does specify that the grantor, which was 78 Cranberry LLC, retained all rights not specifically limited or waived. Our client believes today and has always believed that it's entitled to include this land in calculating density, but it opted not to pursue judicial intervention to adjudicate the rights of the parties once the public raised this issue and once the Corporation Council raised this issue. Instead, the 5.1 acres is excluded from this particular application as it relates to the way in which density has been calculated. I thought we made that clear last month, but once again, this project is not about 15.4 acres. It really is about 10.3 acres because the 5.1 acres is not to be touched, it's not to be changed, it's not to be altered in its size or in any of the documents that refer to the encumbrance that's been put upon that land. I don't know if you have any interest in the Corporation Council's letter or our response to it. We have that in case you would like that for your edification. It did render an opinion that we were unable to use that 5.1 acres. We disagreed with that opinion. Nevertheless, we decided to modify the plan and come in with a plan that did not include it for density purposes. There was also a conservation restriction that was imposed upon the property, which occupies 0.445 acres, just shy of a half acre. That conservation restriction runs to the benefit of the city of Norwalk. That land is able to be included in density calculations, and it is so specified in the easement in this restriction. Once again, since it's related to this project, I would like to provide you with a copy of that restriction. Even though we are entitled to include that 0.445 acres in density calculations, we are not changing the wording of the restriction. We are not suggesting any changes to its configuration, to the restrictions, to the obligations, or any of the language of that easement. It is not to be obviated, it is not to be extinguished. So the 5.1 acres and this 0.445 will remain in their natural state as these two easements require. So as a result of hopefully these two issues being resolved, or at least we think they are, the development that we proposed centers on 10.3 acres. In response to Commissioner Nightingale's question, the number of units that could be achieved on the 10.3 acres is a mathematical formula. It's not a subjective formula, and our calculations have been verified as correct by the Assistant Director of Planning and Zoning, as well as the project licensed surveyor who confirmed the accuracy of the calculations. And since Commissioner Nightingale raised the question, I thought it would be beneficial to have our surveyor's confirmation and verification of the calculations for your record as well. These calculations are on the plans and have always been. Furthermore, I believe from staff that Mr. Wren has in fact confirmed in writing that these zoning calculations that we prepared and the confirmation by Mr. Dealis, the method of calculation is appropriate, he is in agreement with the required calculations, and that they comply with the zoning regulations, and therefore 15 units are permitted. I believe staff has a copy of such correspondence from Mr. Wren. I don't know, do you want, is that part of the record, or do you like that? They have it. Thank you. Okay. Furthermore, the conservation development that we have proposed requires that 50% of the land that we propose to develop be placed in a conservation easement. So if we're at 10 acres, more than 5.1 acres must be in a conservation easement. And the plans clearly demonstrate that. So of the 10 acres to be developed, about half will be developed, more than half will be in the conservation easement. And of the 15.4 acres total, there'll be more than 10 acres that will be in conservation development. So that should obviate the claim or negate the claim that we're clear-cutting 2/3 of the property. It's just simply untrue. And while people may have the right to their own opinion, they certainly don't have the right to their own set of facts. The facts that exist are the facts that are on the plans and in the reports, which have been confirmed by the zoning staff, which have been confirmed by our surveyor, and upon which our licensed civil engineer has placed his seal and his stamp. We stand behind the numbers. They are accurate and they are factual. Further comments on density, which I know this is not a conservation issue, but it was raised at the hearing. The area is zoned AA residential, which means each lot is about 21,750 square feet. They're half-acre lots in this section of Norwalk. So 10 acres should equate to about 20 lots. But due to wetlands, configuration of the property, necessity for frontage, you can't always get just a mathematical take the land, multiply by 2, and come up with a number of lots. So instead of 20 lots, we're proposing 15 dwellings on the 10-acre site. We believe that this is responsible, respectful, and an appropriate use of the property. 50% of the acreage is going to be maintained in a conservation easement, and the remaining acreage in the conservation restriction and conservation easement already granted will remain untouched, unchanged, and forever will remain. We are before you because of impacts to the wetlands. We propose impact of about 2,880 square feet to the wetlands that exist generally at the entrance to the site. We are conducting regulated activities in those wetlands, hence we have a significant activity permit before you. That is the reason for the application. Our impact is about 2,880. Some of the suggestions that we heard during the public hearing, we went back and reviewed what we could do, and you will hear from Holt McCord and Kate Throckmorton that there are some other changes that we could make that would reduce the impact of direct impact to those wetlands. That impact is caused by widening of the driveway, and it's in the same area and on existing driveway that exists today. It's in the same area as the Connecticut Friends School proposed in its proposal, which was approved by this commission. In fact, the proposal today is slightly less than what the Friends School was approved for in terms of its impact on the wetlands. I won't get into that. There was also concern raised about the passage between the wetlands near the drive for wildlife. That was a suggestion that we went back and considered with great, how should I put it? We considered it, and the suggestion that was made was a good one, and you'll hear from Kate of some of the modifications that we would suggest if you deem this application to be worthy of approval, that you could make it a condition of approval and implement that change. Kate will discuss again the vernal pool existence. Holt McCord will walk you through once again the stormwater drainage, groundwater impacts, the upland review area, which was recommended to be 100 feet. We will discuss that. And after Mr. McCord and Ms. Throckmorton review their presentations, their responses to the questions you raised and those of the public, I would just like 5 or 10 minutes to wrap up everything at the conclusion of their comments. So with that, if you would indulge me, I'd like to call Kate, where? Holt McCord first, and address the questions raised by the commission, the public, and also the consultants.
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Holt McCord, registered professional engineer representing the applicant. I did hand out to you a response to the, it was a question from Commissioner Caputo with regard to impervious coverage in 3 areas on site. And also we did receive a report from TJ Engineering, and so we wanted to address the comments that were in that report. First, and starting with the Commissioner Caputo's comment, excuse me, there are 3 areas that we went over in our design concept for the drainage. And so we divided the property into those 3 areas. The area to the north which drains to this wetland system. Just to orient you again, here's Newtown Avenue, here's Cranberry, and so there's a portion of the site that drains to that northerly wetland. There is a portion of the site that drains to the center pocket of wetlands, and then the remainder of the site that flows to the south that goes directly to Stony Brook. So we provided impervious calculations that were requested, and for Area 1, the existing impervious area is 21,000, approximately 21,000. The proposed is about 5,000, and the reduction is because in the north end there's an existing paved parking lot that's going to be removed, and that's why we have the difference there with existing and proposed. In the center of the site, again, we have existing impervious coverage of 27,000 approximately, and proposed about 23,000. That portion of the site is going to have the removal of the White Barn Theater building. There's also an extensive drive network that runs adjacent to that area. And then Area 3, which drains towards Stony Brook directly, there's an increase in impervious coverage in that area, and that's primarily because this portion of the units and drive are really situated in mostly a lawn area. The bottom line of all of that is that the total increase in impervious coverage is not significant, and the fact that we do have our robust treatment train that controls peak rates of runoff for the 2, 5, 10, 25, 50, and 100-year storm events. So we have reductions in all three of those sub-areas. So again, there are a reduction in peak flow to the north, a reduction in peak flow to the center, and a reduction in peak flow to the south. Combine all of that, we obviously have a reduction in peak flow for the entire site. As we mentioned last time, Norwalk's town requirement for DPW is a 25-year storm. We obviously understand the sensitivity of the area with the flooding, and so we have, on this project, gone forward and designed all of our components to go to the 100-year storm event. And then just following up on the comments from TJ Engineering, the first question was with regard to other permitting requirements. Yes, there is a general permit required that goes to the DEP when your site disturbance exceeds 5 acres. We're about 5.5 acres. Typically, that permit is done after local approvals are obtained. In fact, one of the documents that you send to them is the local P&Z approval of your plan. They don't want to look at something that hasn't been approved locally. Second, there's the comment with regard to Connecticut Stormwater Quality Manual. The 2004 Stormwater Quality Manual is intended, and this is their language, as a planning tool and design guidance document. It's not a requirement of the Norwalk Drainage Manual. Many of the guidelines in that manual have been used on our project, but not all of them. It's a cookbook of all different components that you can use. Not that you have to use, and not all are applicable to all sites. Number 3 talks about additional items from the Stormwater Quality Manual, and that was some comments derived about why wasn't this used or why wasn't that used. Again, just to let you know that the project was approved by DPW. We did utilize in the Stormwater Quality Manual several items. Certainly the emergency outlet sizing was performed, and that was also for the 100-year storm event. Water quality flow has been addressed, and that's a comment that I'm about to read further, and that is the water quality flow that goes to each of the different hydrodynamic separators. There's 4 of them on site that protect each discharge point prior to discharge into the Stony Brook wetland system. Item number 4 was runoff from roof areas. Runoff from roof to the ground is actually a positive thing. It's funny how things go forward and backwards. Years ago, you ran roof leaders to the ground. Then things changed. Everybody piped those roof leaders. Same with storm drainage. We piped it all to the river. Now there's something brand new. It's called LID, which is really just old school, going back to where it was. Let's put the rain where it fell originally. And so instead of piping and sending things all over the place or down to the river's edge, the idea is to put that runoff approximately where it fell. And that's where roof leaders going to the ground is a positive thing, and actually is an LID component and consistent with LID design practices. And what happens with that is why it is an LID component. is that runoff then goes overland, through the grass, through lawn areas, through buffer areas, and it allows that runoff to be cleansed, and it also allows for infiltration. So that speaks to the roof leaders. Hydrodynamic separators, there was a question about water quality flows. You'll see in the chart in your handout that the water quality flows are provided for each of those 4 separators that we spoke about previously. All flows for each of those 4 systems are below the maximum treatment flow allowed for the smallest work century facility. Therefore, all those facilities are going to be functioning at 100% peak performance because our water quality flows are below the required flow or maximum flow. Item 6, stormwater flow patterns are changed. This is a discussion that is important many times when you have a watershed or you have a property that has discharge of flow in multiple directions, or let's say 2 directions, just to start. And if you have flow that goes in 2 directions and you take a portion of area that used to go in one direction and you send it to another area, that's considered a negative thing. And the idea is you don't want to reroute flow from one watershed into another. The difference on our site is that we are in one watershed. We are in the Stony Brook watershed. We have 3 design areas that I spoke to you earlier about, the northerly, the central, and the southern. The northerly actually flows through and under the driveway and goes into the southern section, and then the central section goes onto the adjacent property, and before it leaves that adjacent property, it's combined again with the Stony Brook. So we're not going to different areas with it. And the idea that you're taking some flow from one watershed to another is actually not applicable here. Yes, is there some minor adjustments, or I'm sorry, minor differences in the amount that goes to the north, the amount that goes to the center, or the amount that goes to the south? Yes, there has been some adjustment, and that's just by the lay of the land and by the design of the road network and the houses. But we try to make all of those watersheds be as close to what existing conditions are. As I explained to you earlier, the treatment train and the stormwater controls that are on each of those 3 systems reduces the peak discharge for all of those storms, the 2, 5, 10, 25, 50, and 100-year storm. So we don't have a negative impact off-site from any adjustment of flow. And the real crux of that issue of adjustment of flow or redistribution of flow is if you're going to 2 different watersheds, one that goes to the Norwalk River and one that goes to Stony Brook. You don't want to take one from one area and send it to another. We don't have that condition here. Item 7, underground detention system. We had, for the previous application, performed 22 deep test holes on the site. There was some concern about whether our underground detention was going to be in the water table, and all of our structures are above the water table as determined by the modeling observed in those deep tests conducted on that application. There are also 3 stormwater quality basins that do not rely on infiltration. There are low flow orifices on those outlets, and so we aren't, the function of the system is not reliant on infiltration on the stormwater quality basins. However, any infiltration that does occur in those basins is obviously a plus and promoted in our design. And number 8, low impact development measures. I touched on it briefly earlier. Not every measure is appropriate for every project. Certainly we've been on sites where infiltration is one of those LID components that you hear a lot about, and some sites are just not appropriate for LID or for infiltration. I'm not saying this is that site, because we do have infiltration on this site. We do have LID measures that are included on this property, and one of the largest is probably seen on this exhibit, and that is the protection of these areas. This plan shows you the limits of those easements that are protected for the property, some 10 acres. So we've minimized site disturbance through the use of density development, and that's that conservation development concept. We're protecting sensitive natural areas, including wetlands and watercourses and floodplains, through the creation of those easements. And stormwater disconnection of roof leaders that I talked about is also an LID component. That's part of the plan, and infiltration is part of the plan as well. And so that's my summary of the drainage questions that were asked. Thank you.
Commissioners, have questions?
Good evening. For the record, Kate Throckmorton, licensed landscape architect with Environmental Land Solutions. This written response basically follows Mr. Danzer's submission and also the written comments that were submitted by the town of Westport. So I'm just going to go through them briefly and highlight some of the items that are on here. Number one, the importance of this site to the watershed and water quality. I don't think that there's any debate that we are in a watershed that has good water quality and that the water resources warrant responsible development. We believe that the proposed cluster development is designed specifically to protect these on-site and off-site wetland resources. With this development, we're maintaining and enhancing the existing wetland buffers and providing attenuation and treatment to the stormwater runoff, which Holt had just reviewed. With these practices, it will benefit not only the on-site resources, but also the receiving waters that are off-site. The conservation land acre requirement. I think Liz and Holt have reviewed and re-reviewed the areas that are going to be counted, that are going to be preserved, and that most critically the section of Stony Brook will remain in its current easement and undisturbed and remain in its natural state and cover. The spatial configuration, number three, the spatial configuration of the conservation lands. We believe that the conservation easement areas are targeted specifically for the wetlands protection and their buffers. In fact, the site development itself has pulled the existing impacts and existing development out of the buffers. And when we are complete and finished with the project, there will be over 67% of the site, or including 5 acres with the existing easement, plus another 5 for a total of 10 protected areas. They will meet the zoning guidelines by specifically conserving and preserving this land with easements. Number 2, preserving land for park and recreational area. The property sets aside within the conservation easement will be used physically to preserve the land in its natural state, while allowing for passive recreations for its collective owners. Number 3, preserve and protect particular areas and terrain that have natural beauty. The expanded area easement preserves and protects a mix of uplands and wetland areas on site that will preserve the natural beauty of the site from within and from the street views. Number 4, protection of stream, rivers, ponds as a natural resource. Again, the site wetlands have been protected and the buffers improved, and they will be placed when they're restored in the easement areas. 5, preserving wetlands and wildlife habitat. Again, the plan makes revisions to protect a mixture of upland and wetland habitats within the proposed new conservation easements, including upland and wetland dependent species that will help provide, protect, and connect those areas. I'm going to touch on one thing that we're proposing to include in potential revisions, which are 2 box culverts, which will help that connection specifically for wildlife. A low one that will replace the existing pipe that's proposed underneath the entrance driveway, and also a higher one which will remain dry and be suitable for mammals and terrestrial species. Number 4, the driveway crossing. We are proposing to use an existing entry drive that is paved, that crosses and fragments an existing wetland system, and to provide access to the existing residence and theater that's on the site. The existing driveway is paved width between 12 and 15 feet in width. On both sides of the paved driveway, roughly 5 to 6 feet, there is an impacted shoulder of the wetland that has been impacted by placing a fill and sloping down to meet the existing grades, for a total approximate impacted area of between 22 and 27 feet. Beyond this, the natural vegetation does remain, and the topography remains as well. In this shoulder area, there are trees, but more distinctly, the wetlands have been filled, and within those shoulder areas have been now come in with dominated with invasives, and that's what's in the understory along both sides of the driveway. As noted and previously presented, the existing driveway fragments the wetland that has been impacted and including the adjoining shoulder areas, resulting in degradation of this wetland, fragmentation of the habitat, and loss of wetland functions. The specific purpose of reusing this driveway is to minimize additional disturbances and impacts to wetlands. In the driveway area, there's 3 large trees that have to be removed for the driveway widening. In consideration to further reducing the impacts, some of the proposals that we would like to include to reduce impacts for your consideration include a reduction in this entry driveway width by 7 feet. By doing that along the entire length, almost 150 feet of the entry driveway, it reduces the wetland impacts by 860 square feet. That will be a 2-foot reduction in the paved area and roughly a 5-foot reduction in the shoulder by pulling in the walls and reducing the proposed shoulder on the driveway. We've also proposed to include 2 box culverts, as I had noted before, one to provide a hydrological unity at the existing culvert and a higher one to provide passage for upland species. In addition, along both sides of the entry drive, we would like to add 8 native understory trees that can be planted in the area and seeded with native conservation mix along the existing driveway. We also would propose to manage this area specifically to reduce invasive species of reestablishing by hand removal of those species for 3 years. In regarding the stormwater basin adjacent to Unit 6, we would like to add 10 additional white pines to supplement the existing planting plan. The existing planting plan includes over 25 trees and 15 trees and 25 shrubs already proposed in that area. Together with these revisions, it will reduce the impact of almost over 900 square feet. The box culverts will provide additional connection for water and wildlife habitat and reduce the fragmentation to the existing wetland condition. Alternatives that could be considered for specifically the driveway include 2 access areas, one to the very north of the site over here, which would bring in a new driveway along the edge of the existing wetlands, providing and likely impacting additional wetland areas. Or another access point would be to bridge and widen the existing driveway to Cranberry Road. We don't think that either of these are feasible and prudent alternatives specifically because they're likely to actually impact more sensitive areas and larger areas. So by reusing the existing driveway and incorporating our revisions of narrowing it down, we believe that that is by far the best alternative for site access. Number 5, vernal pools. We have been involved in this property since the school property in 2007. We have done and performed 2 vernal pool studies and found no breeding populations of vernal pool-dependent species. The areas that are around this wetland are being restored. There's an existing driveway and buildings that are going to be removed and taken out, and the buffers are going to be enhanced, widened, and replanted. The overflow from the stormwater management system that terminates at the basin in its vicinity is going to be an overflow after the water goes through the treatment system, suspends solids, and helps infiltrate the water. It's not a dumping ground for the stormwater treatment. It's just going to allow the larger storm flows to flow in the same direction and sheet flow as it does today. And I would like to reiterate that the stormwater treatment train has been designed specifically to obtain and maintain a 100-year storm event for up until that storm event. The location area for detention basin adjacent to Unit 16. We went back out there to look more carefully at this area, and we confirmed, in fact, that although there isn't established lawn in this area, this is a previously disturbed area. There's wood chips piles there, and there's a fairly open area that is absent of large trees. The area is dominated by vines and lower invasive species that have infilled this area. So what we would propose, or we reiterate, that the area is going to be maintained. Specifically, on the back side, there's an existing wall and a substantial row of large pine trees that are going to be remaining and maintain the shade and the corridor along Stony Brook. In lieu of that, or not in lieu of it, in addition to that, we would still like to propose that we'd be willing to add an additional 10 white pine trees in that area to provide now at 25 trees in total for that area, which will quickly and rapidly fill in any of the remaining small openings that will occur when the basin is constructed. The overflow from this basin, again, is released over a 35 feet existing flat undulating area through a stone wall before it reaches wetlands and or the watercourse, the receiving waters of the watercourse. And through this area, it will be infiltrated and provide nutrient and uptake by the plants and prevent erosion by the well-established vegetation that's there. I'm going to skip over wildlife. Matt is going to follow up and follow that in detail. The proposed wetland mitigation. Again, I would like to reiterate that, yep.
You refer here a bunch of times to Unit 16.
Yes.
15 units, what's Unit 16?
Yep. It's Unit 15. I stand corrected. This one right here. Thank you. For the wetland mitigation measures, outside of the entry drive, which will occur direct with wetland impacts, all of the other areas in the upland review area are being pulled away from the wetland resource, and we are restoring and revegetating the 50-foot upland buffer around all the circumference of the development area. The existing cluster development actually is in areas of established improvements on the site. And just to reiterate that, this plan, which actually just shows the wetlands areas, but also highlights the cluster in the left, or in the west area, which overlays the existing house, which is in this area, the existing lawn, and the existing driveway in behind. So this overlays existing developed area. In the east, again, the White Barn Theater is located in this area, and the loop and drive network parallels this existing driveway. That will be taken out and pushed further away from the wetlands. So in fact, there's roughly 60% of the area that's going to be developed has been developed and has already improvements that are impacted the site and the existing wetlands and their buffers. And again, the areas around the existing wetlands are being restored. The loop driveway is being taken out. The driveway to Cranberry is being taken out. The road to the White Barn Theater is being taken out. The White Barn Theater is being taken out. And the area is consolidated in the center of the site, away from the wetlands resources. And regarding the comments from the Westport Conservation Director. In Connecticut, the areas adjacent to regulated wetlands are correctly referred to as upland review areas, and the widths vary from town to town. This application follows the regulations for Norwalk. In Norwalk, the regulated area for wetlands is 50 feet, and for open water is 100 feet. This plan will improve and expand and protect the existing upland review 50-foot upland review area along and around the entire development, and also expand the existing buffer along the shoreline for the pond. There is an existing, as previously noted, an existing conservation restriction of 50 feet along the pond. This plan will actually expand and replant from 65 to 90 feet of that 100-foot buffer that is now greatly composed of existing lawn areas.
Sorry. Can you say that again? There's a
Sure.
buffer along the easement?
The existing pond is here, and this is what's considered the White Barn Preserve. There's an existing conservation restriction that runs along the side of the pond, which is 50 feet deep. And as I noted previously, the existing lawn for the house is in this vicinity. The proposed limit of lawn at the smallest increment of measurement is 65 feet. So this is being expanded away from the pond and being pulled towards the development. So that this area is being expanded and enhanced, further enhanced, and the existing lawn area that's there.
That shows the easement, the
Well-
easement B, they're pretty close to those homes.
Let's see. This one? Easement B is this line right here. The homes are situated at about 75 feet away from the pond. So this is now allowed to be lawn up into this conservation easement, 50 feet. That's what's now allowed. That's what now exists. So this 50-foot buffer is being widened away from the pond. And the limit of lawn is being restricted at a minimum from 65 up to 90 feet along Stony Brook Corridor.
How is that restricted?
We've put markers in our proposal. We've got a limit of lawn with markers that is highlighted in this plan, right there.
So there's only about, like, 5 or 10 feet of lawn behind those homes?
There's about 10 feet, correct.
And
10 to 15 feet.
what is widening it? That's the conservation easement that's going to widen it?
The limit of lawn markers is going to widen the habitat along the pond.
I'm looking at a map here that says 40-foot conservation development building wetland setback.
Correct. That is what's required by conservation. That's probably the layout plan. If you go to my plan, which is entitled Landscape and Lighting Plan, which is LP1, it shows the limit of lawn and the finished landscape surface is going to be wider than that 40 feet.
It's going to be,
Wider than the 40 feet.
okay. But what is the 40-foot conservation development of wetlands?
That's a zoning requirement.
Regulations that defines what a conservation development is.
That's the minimum requirement for the zoning regulations for a conservation
So
development.
you need to be set back 40 feet from your
That's
conservation.
what would be the minimum. The existing conservation restrictions at 50, and we're proposing 65 at a minimum for actual final disturbance area.
So you're exceeding the requirement of regulation?
Yes, thank you.
I just have one question.
How does zoning say that?
That's particular backyards. What's to keep the homeowners from making their yard bigger?
Yep. Well, it's going to be firstly managed by an association, so there's not going to be a single person inching their way towards that line. The area is specifically going to be specifically marked. And we've noted on our plan that there's going to be markers with medallions that clearly show it as conservation area. We've also noted in our report, and I didn't specifically say it, but we'd actually be willing to put a low split rail fence if you feel that that would be an additional positive visual marker. So it's going to be, it's not going to, there's going to be a company, it's going to be enforced, and there's going to be, the main easement's going to be maintained there. And just to
But all
reiterate,
these homes are still in the upland review area.
these homes are in the 100-foot upland review area from the pond. Yes, they are. Slightly, correct.
Everyone except 10 out of the 50 homes are in upland. The only
By about 10
here,
feet. By about 10
5
feet.
goes to the
By
east.
about 10 feet, correct. Beyond the driveway widening that requires direct wetland impact, our restoration areas to focus to compensate for that have been in the southeastern portion of the site where we're excavating areas to restore existing impacted wetlands. In this area, let's see. There's an existing loop drive in this area which has completely fragmented and separated this larger wetland system. And we are going to be excavating out some portions of that, expanding the wetland functions and restoring the functions that were there previously. In addition, there's an area in this location which is adjacent to the large parking lot that's coming out, that's been a dumping ground for wood chips for many years. So those wood chips, and along with all the Japanese knotweed that's established there, is again coming out and pulling that out and replanting that area. In conclusion, with the proposed protective wetland measures, site drainage, conservation easement, replanting buffer areas, and expanding buffer areas and restoring wetlands, we believe that with this development, the watershed for Stony Brook and the Saugatuck River will not be adversely impacted for this development. And I would like to turn it over to Matt Pott to go over the details on the wetlands issues. The water.
Good evening, I'm Matthew Pop, landscape architect, professional wetland scientist with Environmental Land Solutions. I was a 16-year member of the Greenwich Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency. I was on the Audubon Greenwich board for 9 years, serving as president for 3 years. I've been doing the summer and winter bird counts in Greenwich and Stanford for probably the last 20 years, and probably the last 25 years I've been volunteering and the director of the Quaker Ridge Hawk Watch, which counts migrating raptors during the fall. I'd just like to comment tonight on some of the wildlife issues that were brought up. One of the issues was that the site drains into an area highlighted by the DEEP as they on their natural diversity database maps. All of Norwalk drains into areas that are highlighted on their maps. All of the Saugatuck rivers are highlighted along the coast. So all of Norwalk drains into those areas. And Mr. Danzer's letter, he noted that there were some additional wildlife species which we did not identify in our report. Some of those species, or most of those species, migrate, and when our timing of our report, those species were not back at that time. They include a great egret, great black-crowned night heron, snowy egret, mallard, kingfisher, great blue heron, red-winged blackbird, snapping turtle, spring peeper. All of those species are fairly common on open water areas in Norwalk. The species that are listed as being of species of concern, the herons and egrets, they come to the site to forage in the pond. They do not breed on the pond or on the site. They breed on islands off of Norwalk. Those forage areas will be protected. We're not touching them. And they'll continue to use the site as they do today. The wood duck is a species which is not usually found in open areas. It's more found in ponds that are surrounded by woodlands. In this, the woods surrounding the pond are going to remain undisturbed, and it be maintained as it currently does. The pictures 15, 16, and 17. 15, 16, and 17 show that buffer that surrounds the pond. Mr. Danzer also noted that he identified a spotted turtle in the vicinity of where we're putting the water quality basin, and he made that sound like that was going to be an adverse impact. That water quality basin is going to be placed in the lawn area, and it's photograph number 15. That basin is set back from the wetland. The lawn area extends through that basin area, past the wetland, and into towards the pond.
Mr. Pop, is
Yes.
it 14 or 15? You just used one in 14. 14?
Yeah, it's 14. Thank you.
I just want to clarify.
Yes. The only vegetation besides the lawn, there's a pretty big high bush blueberry plant right there. By putting in the basin there with the planting plan, there'll be additional coverage, additional habitat, and additional areas for these species to hide and stay away from species that eat them, such as great blue heron and minks and hawks. So by putting the basin in that area, that's probably a benefit to that species. Mr. Dancer did not note any adverse impact to wildlife in this report, and I would agree with that there are no wildlife adverse impacts to wetland species. We are proposing, as we noted in our environmental assessment, mitigation number 6, a rabid turtle survey, as Mr. Danzer called it, which is once the silt fence is placed up on the site and prior to disturbance by excavators, the site will be thoroughly walked, and any turtles that were found, if any, would be replaced and relocated on a downside slope of the silt fence. And that silt fence will protect the turtles from entering the development area. If there's any additional questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
That concludes the presentation by our consultants with respect to the specific questions asked by you and the public and the comments raised by the opponents' experts. Do you have any questions for Mr. McCord, Ms. Throckmorton, or Mr. Pop at this time?
I had a question for Kate on memo page 3. So we talk about reducing the proposed driveway by 7 feet. It'll result in 860 plus or minus square feet of wetland disturbance. And then after item A, down at the bottom paragraph, together these revisions will reduce wetland impacts by 900 square feet. So could you tell me where the extra 40 come in? I missed that.
I actually probably should have brought that to your attention earlier, and that was a discrepancy. When we initially did our calculations, we said 900. We were doing them a little more carefully, and that number is actually 860. So the 860 is correct.
Okay. In general, where this memo talks about different mitigating measures, we'll add more plants and possibly a split rail fence. Are you going to provide us with an updated or revised plan showing these changes?
We would be happy to, since the public hearing had closed, we thought it more appropriate to mention to you that these suggestions we'd be happy to implement if you want them as conditions of approval, and we'll work with staff to come up with the most appropriate locations, for example, for the box culvert and whatever staff deems appropriate, so that I would suspect that that would be a condition of approval that you've affixed in the past, and we're happy to work with staff to do that.
Okay, thank you. I don't know who this is directed to, but I'm mathematically challenged, so I'd like someone to walk through with me the 50% area that's being dedicated for conservation. Because when I do the math, I'm not sure if I should be including certain numbers. So so that I have a clear understanding.
Sure.
Where's the, do you want me to start, or do you have a question where you have the problem?
Let's just take the conservation easement of 5.131 out, because that really isn't part of,
Correct.
So if we go, are you adding the conservation easement B
Yes.
as part of the total of what you're taking 50% from?
Easement B is allowed for density,
Right.
and we have, it is part of that total for the whole site.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's part of what you're saying is the conservation easement that you're providing?
It is part of the complete area of conservation on the property. So we have 10 plus acres ultimately that we're working with density, and for that same area, we have 5.1 additional or acres of open space, and that conservation easement B is part of that.
Okay. I think that's where my math was going right. Does anybody else have questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Is alternatives the parking lot area, which seems to be fairly far from wetland area, and the 5 homes, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 are all, very close to, pretty close to this conservation easement area, 10-foot yards behind them. They're all within the upland review area. Was an alternative considered where instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 homes in this western portion, that more were in the eastern portion of where the parking lot is, where it's not wetland?
One of the things that,
And why are you trying to get 8 houses
In that area where there is a lot of wetland and a lot of
encroachment on upland review area. And yet, you're putting the parking lot into the conservation area,
Let me talk to,
which is already, developed.
okay, just speak to that in sort of two ways. The area here where the parking lot is, it's not very well shown on the plan that there is this overhead electric wire that comes right through here. And so it looks like there's this wide open area that we're not using, but it is really impacted by this overhead transmission line. And it's not like the overhead line that would go to your house. This is a easemented high power electric line. It's not on a giant tower, but it is still an electric line that has impact to where residents might be.
Is there an easement for that?
There is an easement, yes.
But you can make a conservation easement where there's a power line easement?
I'm sure that they are, it has to piggyback with their requirements as well. And so if the electric company says, hey, we need to clear this area, then that would be part of the easement as well. The other thing that I think is in this area that's somewhat lost, and I know you talked a little bit there, but we do have units here. And again, this plan shows really very well. The green is the wetlands. The red line is the setback based on either 100 foot from the water or 50 foot from the wetlands. Or there's one other part, there's a slope that goes beyond either of those. The slope's too steep, that setback goes up. And so you'll find that some of these areas actually are greater than 100 feet from the wetlands or the water course. But we have units here because we are disturbing, we're taking down this white barn theater. So it's an area of disturbance. Some of these other areas are not disturbed or will not be disturbed through the process of leaving them alone. If we work to the south, you're right, there's a little corner of a lot of these units that is within that setback line. But if you look at it a little more, from a higher level, you'll see that the majority of all of the development occurs inside of the setback lines. I mean, it's compact, it's really created right in here. And I think, frankly, I think the site planner's done a nice job on putting those there. I understand the comment here. It looks on the plan like there's a lot of room there, but when you put in, factor in that electric wire, it takes a good portion of the site away.
So, are you not allowed to have residential plots under the transmission line?
I think you can, but I'm not sure you'd want to live there. I mean, people do it, but if we're starting new and fresh, I'm not sure we want to put a home underneath the wire. That's up for thought. But we're taking a property here that does have that issue. We are reclaiming an area that is a parking lot and bringing it back to more a natural area. We are taking the existing area that is going to be disturbed and the building removed, and it's part of the existing drive network. And yes, we've got some units adjacent to it. These units, I think, you don't have a problem with. I think you're looking at, can we push them further in this direction? That's, I think, the comment I'm hearing here. The reason why is that the power line, that's why. They were kept on this side of that line. To the south, you can see those units, and the development is really clustered very well within the setbacks of that regulated area line.
Do we have a title search which shows the easement for the power line? I don't know who to ask.
Yeah, what are the boundaries of that easement?
We have a copy of the easement to that power line if Keith Russo is getting it. We weren't asked to provide a title search, and it's typically not something that we require of us, but he seems to have it.
Only because the questions come up about it.
50-foot easement associated with the center line of
I've negotiated those with utilities, and I know they're very precise.
I mean, is it disingenuous to say this is going to be a conservation easement, but it's, subject to clearing and various non-easement, non-conservation type of activities by the utility?
I think that's a function of, what is the specific use of that easement and how, right now, it is cleared, or that's the way they operate. We're not changing the use. We're providing this land as conservation easement. It exists there today. It's part of the acreage of the site, and we're not proposing to do anything more to it than happens today.
What if, over time, trees grow there, and they get to be a certain height, and then the utility comes in, and are they entitled to come in and trim them, prevent their natural growth? And does that make it a conservation easement, or is it kind of a restricted conservation easement?
Kate Throgmorton for the record. The existing easement is proposed to be maintained as a meadow, specifically because of that, and this area that's actually within the wetlands has been cut of trees underneath the power lines.
Do you have a map that shows this?
My understanding, I have not seen a map that
Just
shows
for the record,
that.
please state your name.
Oh, I'm sorry, Keith Russo for Special Properties Group. I have not seen the map. I would have to double check the title search to see one.
It refers to a map. It's quite long, it's quite detailed. Yeah, the right to trim, cut, take down, remove at any time such trees, parts of trees, limbs, branches, underbrush structures within the judgment of the grantee, and that's the power company. Power company is the grantee. In the judgment, the grantee may interfere with or endanger the electric line. I mean, they pretty much have the right to come in, protect their line, make sure it's still operating, to improve it, which is typical. I don't know how to answer Bill's question. For the record, I think if I'm reading this correctly, it's something in volume 344, at page 201. It starts with it's from a Lucy L. Flaherty, administratrix of the estate of Edward J. Flaherty. And this goes back to a document that was apparently signed in 1932. And it was to then Connecticut Light and Power Company, granting them the easement. So they put the line in. But I don't know how to answer Bill's question. I don't know how it
But does it
interferes.
specify the width of the?
It gives dimensions. It's giving, a surveyor could make sense of this. I can't. Talking about crossing said Newtown Avenue to an iron pin and a wire fence, blah, 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 blah. It's giving surveyor measurements. But then it refers to a map. Said route is more clearly designated, defined by a map here and to attached. Except I don't know that it's attached. It might be attached agreement, but I don't know if it was filed. It seems it says it's filed. Map attached to made partially relevant. Mark, quote, location of right-of-way of Connecticut Light and Power Company across the property of Helen Cook, towns of Westport and Norwalk County of Fairfield, State of Connecticut, scale 1 inch equals 200 feet, January 1932, end quote. It doesn't indicate if the map is filed on the land records in this document. But I'm guessing, I can only guess, the surveyor could tell you exactly where it's located. But I don't know how to answer those questions about it, if that interferes with the easement. There's an overhead wire, sir? It's an overhead wire.
If I could just re-clarify, the area that's underneath the wires now Those trees does come over the wetlands line. This area is kind of a scrub existing. It's going to remain exactly in that condition. There's no proposal to change that. The parking lot is located here. This line goes right through here. And the parking lot extends roughly to here. And it's proposed to be a meadow. There's some additional screening trees that are proposed, but clearly going to be clear of the wires. So I think that any replanting does have to include the ability for them to keep the wires clear.
And then you mentioned to widen the road coming in, that 3 trees over 12-inch diameter are going to be cleared?
Correct. 3 large trees.
And any other smaller trees as well?
There is some smaller scrub. As I said, most of the scrub immediately adjacent to the driveway is infilled with understory bits and invasive species. So it's not until you get actually further out into the wetlands that you see a lot of natural native specimen trees and or shrub.
These are these trees, these 12-inch diameter trees are in wetland.
They're adjacent to the driveway. They're just immediately adjacent to the driveway.
And would you say those trees provide, part of the habitat of the wetlands if they're, I mean, immediately adjacent to the driveway bisects the wetland, right?
They contribute to shading the wetlands. There's 3 large trees. There's no doubt that there's going to be an opening of the canopy, but we're proposing that that area be replanted with 8 trees. So over time, they will replace those trees. The intent is for it to be reestablished as a canopy over the driveway.
Any other questions or comments?
Any other questions or comments? So if you would indulge me 5 minutes, thank you for your time and for your attention, and I'm sure you will give this due consideration and take into consideration all of the reports, the plans, the expert testimony provided, and the suggestions that we have given tonight as conditions of approval if you deem this appropriate to approve. Just to review, we believe the proposal is reasonable and responsible. It's a development that conserves and preserves land. It enhances the appearance and natural beauty of the existing land that is there today. The 5.1 and the 0.44 conservation easement and conservation restriction will remain unchanged. An additional 5 acres will be added to that 5+ acres, bringing the total conservation land of this 15 acres to over 10 acres. The plan has been designed to above and beyond the 25-year storm to the 100-year storm, so that Stony Brook and surrounding areas will be protected from flooding and pollution. I'm frankly not certain how to verify some of Mr. Danzer's comments and claims, as we didn't grant permission to go on the site. I don't know when he was on the site, or if there's any maps that indicate where he was on the site or what information he gathered. Nonetheless, I think we've responded to his comments and those of the engineer who was retained by the opponents. The conservation development is far superior to a subdivision. A subdivision has lesser setbacks than what is required for conservation development. Conservation development requires 40 feet. Typical subdivisions require 25 feet on the side and in the rear. This is by far superior to a typical subdivision. The driveway from Cranberry Road will be removed. There will be a homeowners association that has bylaws that will manage how the site is maintained. Issues that Mr. Holowinko suggested, how do you maintain that area behind, in addition to just the posts and maybe a fence. The homeowners bylaws will address that very clearly. In our opinion, other alternatives would have greater impacts on the wetlands and the watercourse. For example, the school that you approved had an direct impact to wetlands of 3,100 square feet, and now with the additional narrowing of the driveway from 22 to 20 as we proposed, plus narrowing the shoulders, the impact is going to be less than 2,100 square feet, which is almost a third less than what the Connecticut Friends School suggested to you and you approved. We believe the short-term impacts, the long-term impacts, certainly the short-term impacts will be the impact to the driveway as we create the driveway at 20 feet wide. However, the long-term impacts would be better functioning wetlands, repairing wetland areas that were neglected, removal of invasives, excuse me, and increasing the buffers that exist today. The irreversible and irretrievable loss, it's going to be less than 2,100 square feet. The character of injury, it's limited as best we can, generally the same as approved for the Friends application. And I think we've already talked about mitigation. One thing that we haven't discussed this evening, I just want to bring it to your attention, is the opponents by their attorney, Mr. Ainsworth, who actually was also an attorney representing 3 individuals who support the project. He submitted to you a brief in opposition to this project and a brief in support of his intervention petition. We received that at the hearing 3 weeks ago, and we do have a reply to that. It really just goes to all of the issues that he suggests as giving the interveners, the proposed interveners, the ability for you to grant their petition. We believe that their petition is defective. We believe it doesn't meet the threshold necessary to give them standing and give them the status of an intervener. In order to do that, you need to determine whether or not the activity we present, which would result from the approval of the application, is reasonably likely to unreasonably adversely impact the public trust in the water and other natural resources. And we'll give you our responsive papers, but we don't believe that they have demonstrated how we would unreasonably affect the public trust and damage the natural resources that exist on the site. So I didn't want us to not respond to Attorney Ainsworth's comments and his memo. So with that, unless you have any further questions for Mr. McCord, Ms. Throckmorton, Mr. Russo, or Mr. Pop, we ask that you give this due consideration and perhaps at your next meeting render a decision on our application. We thank you for your time and your attention, and we hope that this matter can come to closure at your next meeting. Any other questions for us? Any questions? Then we have nothing further to present. We thank you again.
So, at this point, if we have nothing else, do I hear a motion to close this public hearing?
Make a motion, we close this public hearing.
Motion's been made by Matt Caputo, seconded by Ed Hallowenko. Any further discussion? Excuse me, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Okay, so our public hearing is closed.